Today, we will hear from civil rights and state leaders on why attacks to our freedom to vote in Senate Bill 747 and 749 will not stand. Because we must unite against this threat. After all, we built this democracy. It is ours, and we're not going to let a handful of extremists take it away.
Thank you for being here today. My name is Sailor Jones. I work for Common Cause North Carolina, a group that has for 50 years believed that voters in the great state of North Carolina deserve elections free from partisan manipulation. But just 2 weeks into June, we are already facing two of the General Assembly's boldest moves aimed at ruining fair elections in our state. Senate Bill 747 is the first of the worst, friends, to distract voters from extremists pulling the strings on the bill's 16 pages of voting restrictions. Proponents will tell you there is nothing in this bill out of line with how elections are conducted in other states. But to be clear, Senate Bill 747 is far from how we should run elections in this one. Among other changes, Senate Bill 747 would install harsh new limits on mail-in voting that would make it possible for mail delays to dictate votes, allow more people to challenge ballots, and subject them to public inspection. Even if lawmakers were to follow through with only one of these changes, like ending the same 3-day mail-in grace period Republicans unanimously championed in 2009, they will effectively toss thousands of valid ballots. Thousands, say it with me. Including many from their own party, postmarked before Election Day, but delayed by the USPS, natural disasters, or anything else beyond the voters' control. In 2020, over 12,000, say it, 12,000 mail-in ballots were accepted during the period Republicans are primed to cut. Over a quarter of those ballots came from GOP voters, and over 40% were unaffiliated. All would be tossed under these new rules, and since military and overseas voters keep their extended absentee period under federal law, friends, the change won't produce faster election results, becoming yet another failed justification for harming disabled, elderly, and student voters taking the brunt of this callous change. Senate Bill 747 would also gut same-day registration, impacting election experience of hundreds of thousands of voters. Under current law, voters who register and vote on the same day must attest to who they are and prove where they live. Regardless, this bill would deny a regular ballot to all of them, forcing these voters to instead cast a provisional ballot. Remember, over 116,000 North Carolinians used same-day registration in 2020, including more Republicans than any other party. But let's also not forget who this is targeting. Even if lawmakers allowed a regular ballot for a same-day voter who has a photo ID and document that matches their current address, most students do not have that. And thousands of our youngest voters, especially those first-time freshmen, will be the ones left out this time who may not come back the next. Senate Bill 747 would also further defund elections, barring counties from accepting any private funds to ensure safe and secure elections. Investment, friends, that 97, say it, 97 of 100 counties took in 2020. So while bill sponsors have plenty to say about the perils of private funding, they're awfully quiet when asked about helping to make up the difference. Speaking of undercutting elections, before the ink was dry on 747, legislators introduced 749 to manipulate boards of elections and ensure more gridlock for voting and less success for voters. Instead of a current clear path for making decisions, a deadlocked party structure on state and local boards will tie up everything. Early voting plans, corruption investigations, everything. Say it with me. Everything In particular, this bill jeopardizes early voting options in all 100 counties. Under it, party line local votes on early voting options could default to a deadlocked state board of elections, leading to one early voting site per county, open only during business hours, with one weekend option, a result that endangers North Carolinians' favorite way to vote, forces working voters to drive long distances, and produces overwhelmingly long lines whenever voting is available. While Senator Daniel is lucky enough to live in the county seat of Morganton, his fellow Senate Bill 749 co-sponsor, Senator Hayes, could have to travel 22 miles round trip from Spruce Pine to Bakersville to vote early, as he's done for the past 23 years. This is nothing compared to voters they aren't thinking about, like Ocracoke residents who would be forced to take a multi-hour ferry to the Hyde County Board of Elections to vote in 2024. This may be why North Carolinians already soundly rejected this type of total election takeover when lawmakers placed it on the ballot in 2018. Past attempts by the legislature to shift the governor's authority have also been struck down as unconstitutional by courts and deemed out of line, friends, by all living ex-governors back then. Both changes will bind elections in ways that are costly for counties, chaotic for voters, and calamitous for our elections, giving Republican leaders the results they want in the only election they currently care about, 2024. With these bills, that same care clearly doesn't extend to us.
Good morning. Chantal Stevens with the ACLU. And I know we're fighting to have our voices heard as usual, so I'm going to try to speak as loudly as possible. As John Lewis said, voting is the foundational right that protects all other rights. It is the bedrock of our democracy. Today, like many days before, we once again stand before you with a shared outcry to reject systems that want to suppress our ability to have an electoral process that embraces fairness, equity, and justice. We at the ACLU of North Carolina share the concerns of our partners and our fellow North Carolinians in regard to Senate Bill 747. This bill, if passed, would have far-reaching and detrimental consequences for the democratic process in our state. It is an assault on the fundamental principle of equal access to the ballot box and threatens to disenfranchise countless North Carolinians. One of the most troubling aspects of SB 747 is its sharp reduction in access to absentee mail-in voting. This change would disproportionately impact older voters, disabled voters, and rural voters who rely on this method to exercise their right to vote. By erecting new barriers, this bill effectively silences their voices and undermines the principles upon which our democracy stands. As Saylor said, it also guts the popular same-day registration, a vital safeguard that has enabled countless eligible voters, including college students, to participate in the electoral process. By eliminating this provision, the bill seeks to stifle the participation of young voters, denying them the opportunity to have their voices heard. This bill exposes voters and election volunteers to harassment and criminal charges. By opening the door for frivolous challenges and accusations, this bill creates an environment of intimidation and fear that has no place in our democratic society. It attempts to impose discriminatory and unreliable signature matching for mail-in ballots. This kind of provision would disproportionately impact communities of color and further perpetuate systemic discrimination that we must actively dismantle. Contrary to what some would have you believe, these proposed changes are not about fairness or balance. They are thinly veiled attempts to manipulate the electoral system in favor of those who seek to consolidate their power at the expense of the people's voice. And if that wasn't enough, just this week, we heard the introduction of Senate Bill 749 titled No Partisan Advantage in Elections.
Yeah, right.
While it may claim to bring balance, it is yet another effort by a controlling party to suppress the voices of North Carolinians. We at the ACLU of North Carolina strongly condemn these attempts to undermine our democracy and suppress the votes and voices of our community. We call upon legislators to reject SB 747 and SB 749, to stand on the right side of history, and to champion the principles of equality, fairness, and justice. Our democracy depends on it.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to try to speak pretty loudly. I'm Cassandra Stokes, the Democracy and Economy Coordinator for NC Black Alliance. And for all the wrong reasons, yet again, North Carolina is continuing to make headlines. We are currently witnessing political gamesmanship where the people are losing, where voters are losing, where black people are losing, where students are losing, and rural residents are losing. In 3 disappointing rulings, our North Carolina Supreme Court reinstated a racially discriminatory voter ID requirement, repealed important safeguards against partisan gerrymandering, and suspended voting privileges for those with felony convictions. The court has handed North Carolina lawmakers essentially limitless authority to alter voting and secure their own dominance indefinitely. To our North Carolina lawmakers, this is not a game. Your unchecked power is a remnant of Jim Crow that disproportionately silences black voters and manipulates voting to lock in your own power in perpetuity. How can we support measures entitled the Election Integrity Act when the lawmakers alter the law to make voting by mail more challenging and eliminating the 3-day requirement and requiring that all absentee ballots are received by Election Day? What is election integrity after a record number of black and brown voters cast mail-in ballots in 2020 and NC politicians are now making it more difficult to cast ballots? When voters who are black and brown are once again silenced, suppressed, and subjugated, once again I ask you, where is the election integrity? And I inquire about your own integrity. So when Senate Bill 747 targets mail-in ballots and imposes a biased and unreliable signature matching system and making modifications that would increase the burden on our elderly, on our HBCUs, on our colleges and universities, on our disabled voters and our rural voters, as well as discrimination against communities of color throughout the state's mail-in ballot verification process in North Carolina. While also Senate Bill 747 allows less time for voters to return their mail-in ballot and also guts same-day registration by making all registration ballots a provisional ballot. So I invite you all, everyone standing here in this grass, to come back at 12 for another press conference and to come back at 6 to let our General Assembly know that our power and that our voices will not be gerrymandered. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Shruti Parikh, and I am the Voter Engagement Director for North Carolina. Hello, my name is Shruti Parikh, and I am the Voter Engagement Director at North Carolina Asian Americans Together. Our organization aims to increase civic engagement and remove barriers for Asian American Pacific Islander voters in North Carolina. I'm here today because Senate Bills 747 and 749 pose an alarming threat to our community. They would not only increase barriers to voting, but the bills seek to dismantle our fundamental voting rights. SB 47 would strip our voting rights from every angle, including restricting access to absentee mail-in voting, imposing discriminatory and unreliable signature matching for mail-in ballots, gutting same-day registration, and even exposing voters and election volunteers to harassment and criminal charges. Make no mistake, this bill is designed to suppress the voices of AAPIs and other communities of color and undermine the principles of fairness and equality. Senate Bill 747 sharply reduces access to absentee mail-in voting. of Asian American voters have utilized absentee and early voting more than any other demographic over the last 3 elections, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic when anti-Asian hate was at its peak. Another alarming provision of SB 747 is its attempt to impose discriminatory and unreliable signature matching for mail-in ballots. We know that software-based signature matching does not work. The discrepancies and mistakes in this software most negatively impact communities of color, people with disabilities, and elderly North Carolinians. The AAPI community was so strongly against this provision that they sent the Board of Elections over 77 comments in 1 week opposing the implementation of signature matching. This is yet another provision that will prevent our community and other communities of color from fairly casting their vote. Additionally, SB 747 robs us of same-day registration, a lifeline for AAPI and BIPOC voters. Along with early voting, same-day registration is often used by the AAPI community. This bill would count same-day registration votes as provisional, which could leave ballots uncertain for up to 10 days. It would jeopardize thousands of votes, delay election results, and make it tougher on our election workers. Furthermore, provisions of SB 747 would deter or criminalize normal voting procedures such as participation in voter registration drives and assisting disabled and other voters at the polls, including those with limited English proficiency. Almost a third, 33%, of Asian Americans in North Carolina have limited English proficiency, and this bill would target those who assist them with their language barriers. Help that is these voters' right. We're here today to say no to the new barriers that SB 747 and 749 want to impose on voters. These bills not only silence Asian American voters, they also particularly target older voters, college students, disabled voters, and rural voters. We call on legislators and supporters of SB 747 and 749 to remember the true essence of democracy, cease their monstrous attacks on our fundamental right to vote, and we urge them to reconsider their stance and listen to the voices of the people they were elected to represent. Our democracy deserves better than a bill seeking to divide and silence our voices. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Kayla, and I'm the community organizer at Pueblo, where we focus on reproductive justice and immigration advocacy. We serve both citizens and non-citizens of this community alike, both of which will be harmed by SB 747. Among the many harmful effects of this bill, we'll have SB 47 will place undocumented community members at a higher risk of state and public surveillance. Page 6 of SB 747 states, if a person is disqualified from jury duty because the person is not a citizen of the United States, the clerk of the Superior Court shall, on a quarterly basis, report this information electronically to the State Board elections. The electronic file shall include the person's name, address, state of birth, and other personal information from the master jury list, along with the reasons for the person's disqualification and the date of disqualification. Sharing the information of undocumented individuals with the State Board of Election is unnecessary and could lead to sensitive information such as their immigration status to fall in the wrong hands. We have seen hate groups target the undocumented community before, and this bill would increase the risk of this happening in our state. The section's purpose is to remove foreign citizens from voting rolls. However, one cannot register to vote without a social security number, so that process of elimination already exists. Right. Why are we risking the safety of our community? This bill will increase surveillance, increase the risk of deportation, and criminalize humans for simply existing. Yes. Privacy and safety are not just a U.S. citizen right, it's a human right, and SB 747 violates that. I stand before you today urging you to urge your representatives to vote against this bill that is harmful to both voters and non-voters alike. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Brown. I am the Deputy National Field Director for Black Voters Matter. And last night I was asked to speak at the last minute, and I was like, I'm going to write a speech. I was like, for what? These laws change on a day-to-day basis, and they change in the dead of night. So what is the point of writing a speech when we know for a fact that the laws may be changed by morning? It is important to understand that these laws are affecting the lives of and the livelihood of the people that we fight for every single day. The folks that are making these decisions are the folks that we have put in office. So how dare you sit in the people's house and think that you can make these type of decisions that affect me on a day-to-day basis? How dare you think that you can sit in the people's house and we will accept these decisions on a day-to-day basis? How dare you think that you can sit in the people's house and this will be accepted on a day-to-day basis? No more. Absolutely no more. We have had enough. We will continue to fight, and we will show you exactly who the people are in the state of North Carolina by putting people in office that reflect what we need on a day-to-day basis. A budget, what we need on a day-to-day basis. Medicaid that is actually funded, what we need on a day-to-day basis. Environmental justice, what we need on a day-to-day basis. Voting rights on a day-to-day basis. We will continue to put people in place that will reflect who we are, what we look like, and omit you as the people sitting in office trying to make those decisions.
We'll now take questions for all of our speakers, if anyone has any. Danielle Brown. Danielle, will you speak and spell your name?
Danielle Brown, D-A-N-I-E-L-L-E, last name Brown, B-R-O-W-N.
Like the beautiful color. Yes, sir. Well, one need, excuse me, Sailor Jones at Common Cause, one need only look at 2018 to see how North Carolinians feel about the State Board of Elections. This one and the Republican-led one under Pat McCrory. Obviously, the governor guides the party who has led these, but under Karen Brinson-Bell and Kim Strack, those two administrations agree that voter fraud in this state is vanishingly rare. And it's also true that North Carolinians voted 2-1 on an amendment that pushed back against these types of partisan changes to the State Board of Elections. So we already know how voters feel. We already know how the courts feel about this type of power grab. And now we're hearing a reversal of that inside the General Assembly by a handful of people who neither represent those voters nor those courts. So that says all it needs to say about how voters feel about this change and any others that would wreak havoc on their elections going into 2024. Any other questions, friends? And any other comments? Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.